Hey everyone, it's Brandon Lee, host of the podcast Escaping Rock Bottom. I have a great guest on with us today. Her name is Hannah. She is Mrs. American, so I'm curious to see what led Hannah down that route. And by the way, she brought her crown or tiara.
Yes, either one.
Crown or
either
tiara.
Is good.
Okay.
Yes.
It's pretty sparkly, that I can tell you. But the great part about Hannah's story is, we have so many people on this show, on this podcast, and they talk about a lot of early childhood trauma and how that early childhood trauma sent them down a pretty dark path, as my story is, right? I suffered a lot of early childhood trauma with me, and that sent me spiraling. That is not the case here, even though Hannah, her life did spiral. It got pretty dark at times, multiple times in her life. She did struggle with substance use, a lot of drinking and alcoholism, also suffered anxiety and depression. So we decided to have her on the show today. You were just on Good Morning Sunshine. First off, welcome to the podcast, Escaping Rock Bottom.
Thank you. It was awesome to be on Good Morning Sunshine, too.
It was awesome to have you on there. The only thing is that show was only 7 minutes long, and we have all the time in the world to talk about your full story.
Uh-oh.
I know.
Be prepared.
Be prepared.
Be prepared.
Hannah, every time I have somebody on the show, I always ask them to take me back to their childhood. Where was Hannah born and raised? What did your childhood look like?
So as you alluded to at the beginning, my childhood was fantastic. I'm one of the few people who has struggled, I feel like, with addiction and lots of mental health and addictive illness problems from a great family. I was kind of one of those just happy-go-lucky kids when I was younger. I grew up with a family in Burlington, Vermont, South Burlington, Vermont, little suburb in a wonderful hometown where the neighbors cared about each other. And I had a great school. I had parents that loved me. I was sort of primed for any of the success that I ever wanted to have in my life.
So this is one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you on the podcast, because to me, it's rare that somebody does have what we'll just label it kind of a picture perfect childhood and upbringing. And then to hear how the wheels came off. How did you just go off the rails at some point in your life? At what point in Hannah in your life did you start to suffer from mental health? And what did that look like?
Sure. So I think it's kind of a two-pronged answer. I could tell when I went off of the picture perfect lifestyle was when I went off to college, and I had been kind of that goody two shoes, straight A student, didn't swear, never had a boyfriend, was like the perfect little church girl, 3-season athlete, headed for the Ivy Leagues. So I thought, ended up I wasn't quite smart enough for that in the end, but that's what I thought anyway. So, and all of that, and I actually didn't get into the Ivy League school that I had applied to, and it devastated me. I had done everything I could ever possibly do to be perfect on paper, and it still wasn't enough. And that was when I was 17 years old, a junior. And from there, I looked around, and I had never been to a party. I'd never had a substance. I think I had half of a cigarette when I was 10 years old, and I was like, this is awful. But I looked around, and I was like, you know what? They look like they're having more fun than I'm having. And if I'm not going to succeed at everything that I wanted anyway, then what the hell am I doing this for, right? So I intentionally walked into the dark side where it looked like people who were partying were having the greatest time of their lives, and I was missing out. And then I went off to Arizona State, a top 10 party school. I think I probably subconsciously chose it for that reason. I had never seen a football player. I wanted to see a Letterman jacket. I wanted to see a marching band and cheerleaders, and all of those kind of quintessential American things that in a small town, I saw cows, and I just saw the same people, in a school of 800 kids over and over and over again. And I just wanted something different. So then I intentionally, when I got to Arizona State, I decided to try everything that I could possibly get my hands on to see what I had been missing out on and see how the other side lived, if you will. So that was the side where it became really intentional for me. Looking back, now that I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I was like, how did this happen, right? As you're saying, this isn't the normal path to addiction. I look back, and I was always a person who had that addictive and compulsive mentality, no matter what. You and I were talking briefly before this. It's the all or nothing thinking. It's the, I have to be the best at something or I'm the worst. I have to be the smartest or I'm the stupidest. I have to be the prettiest or I'm the ugliest. The most social or I'm a hermit. Living in my mind in extremes is one of the complete trademarks of addictive illness. being selfish. Everything is all about me, self-absorbed, being manipulative. I became really good at figuring out how to work situations to my advantage. And that's total telltale signs of an addictive personality. That perfectionism of I can make things around me stable and comfortable and predictable by being a perfectionist, and then I'm okay. And I never realized any of that growing up. Like, we didn't talk about feelings much in my family. It was just not a thing. And so I never processed any of those feelings. It was just as long as I could look good and put a smile on my face and show up and not embarrass my family, then I was winning. And eventually, over a long process, there wasn't that moment, right? But over a long process, that attempting to be everything to everyone in every aspect of my life, like the perfect homemaker and, woman like Martha Stewart, like my mom, and the fierce business person like my dad. I tried to be both of those people all at the same time. And you can't do that. Like, you just can't be both. And eventually I drove myself to the extreme of just self-destruction, because I couldn't stand to be in my own body and in my own mind anymore with that lack of perfection that I always felt like I was achieving.
Okay, first off, where do you think you got that where does somebody learn that perfectionism? You mean to tell me that you didn't learn perfectionism? Like, was your mother a perfectionist? Like, I feel like that behavior has to be modeled in some way, or does it not? I don't know.
Yeah, it probably was modeled. I mean, I remember.
Was your mom a perfectionist?
Yes.
See, there it is.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so
totally.
You got something from her. Like, maybe this is where I can make the link.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yes, go for it.
Everyone's trauma does not look the same. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's trauma does not look the same. People should never compare traumas to anybody. In that, don't minimize your trauma because you weren't sexually assaulted as a child, like I was, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't minimize your trauma, right? Parents divorcing is a traumatic life event for a child, okay? So if a child witnesses a parent's getting a divorce, that's a traumatic life event. Just that event can send somebody spiraling, right? And so if behavior is being modeled to you at a young age that is sending you spinning, that in itself could just be a version of trauma. And I know sometimes we hear the word trauma and we just think the worst of the worst, whereas it could be something very slight but have such a heavy impact on that person. And perfection doesn't exist. And so if you continue to be that like perfect, you're always going to be disappointed, and always beating yourself up. So let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. If you made a mistake and something didn't come out perfect, would you talk bad to yourself?
Is there another way?
See?
I mean, that's all there ever has been.
That's so damaging.
That's all that there ever has been in my life was, Hannah, if you could just be a little bit faster on the track team, if you could just be a little bit smarter in class, if you could go sit next to the smartest kid and let her rub off on you a little bit, right? If you could just be a little bit more fierce in those negotiations on the business side, if you could get your grades up and then you could get into the Ivy League school and then you'd be okay and then you'd get the husband and then you'd get the job and then you'd get the house and the car that would make dad proud. And if you don't get that, then internally there was nothing other than self-ridicule. Absolutely. So I've been the harshest on myself my entire life. I probably did pick it up. I mean, I remember at early days, like my mom, who was super sweet and wonderful and loving. I'm not, slamming on her at all, but she would make these matching outfits for us to go to church, the matching little Easter Sunday outfits and the mom-daughter things. And I remember in the grocery store one time, her just flipping out, like screaming at my brother and I, because we were just acting out. Like we were, and at my, I tell my husband now, and he was like, you mean you were being kids?
Yeah,
right?
like kids being kids.
But
yeah.
I remember her saying, stop it right now. You're embarrassing me. Right. And it, I think internally gave me all of these sort of educations that I was just here to make other people look good. Yeah. Right. That my behavior was a reflection of who they are. And so therefore I better straighten up and fly right. And then I also remember hearing my dad, like when I got a little bit older, I heard my dad constantly talking about his friends, like from the country club or wherever, from, he was a financial advisor. So from that circle, where they were all going to school and what they were all doing for their first jobs and how much money they were making or what cars they were driving. Or did you know that this one went to this place on a scholarship to do that, which in itself isn't a bad thing. It's really cool to have parents that are proud of you and your achievements, and that's wonderful. But if that's the only thing that you ever hear as a snippet about the value of other people, then that's what you internalize. And so I never heard, wow, that kid is so nice. Look how he helped the neighbor lady next door clean up her leaves. Like, isn't that the most amazing human you've ever seen? It was the sort of the opposite of that in a way, right? Okay, well, what have they done to achieve recently? And when you come from a family that worships achievement in a way, that's totally what I internalized. And I had to try to live up to that. And then every single time I failed in any way, I was so, and I still am, I'm so hard on myself. I'm my worst critic. But I've done a lot of work to try to soften that and to be okay with who I am today. And that's why I share. That's why I share my recovery story.
Right.
You know, like when you called today, it was like, hey, Han, can you jump on this podcast? And I'm going, to me, that's like the bat signal going up.
For sure.
Because there are so many people that are just like me out there that are hurting inside. Even if you have the car and you have the house and you have the spouse and everything on paper looks good, you know, people would look at you and think like, she's got it together or he's got it together. But inside you're dying and you don't know what's wrong with you and you don't know how to make the pain go away. And so you try every single way that you can that's socially acceptable to try to mask that pain. There's thousands, if not millions of people in the US alone that are suffering the same way that I did. And I never once saw an example of someone that looked like they had a kind of cool life talk about anything vulnerable, talk about a struggle. I never knew that adults struggled. And so now that I have the opportunity to open my heart and just be like, hey, y'all, here's my failings. Here's what I suck at. Here's what I've tripped on along the way and picked myself up and dusted myself off and learned. If I can share that with other people, it's the most gratifying thing in my life now to be able to share my own imperfections with people, because that's actually where like the light shines through, is those cracks in us that I never knew.
Yeah, because you know what? Here's the thing. I look at people who, you know, they try to put on this perfect front, right? And that's the image that they're showing out to the world. Oftentimes, that's just a cover up of a lot of hurt and a lot of pain and things like you said, embarrassing. What they equate as embarrassing, what I see as vulnerability. Okay, I truly think like perfectionists, they see something where they may have messed up or they're ashamed. Mm-hmm. Right, of, you know, particular behaviors. I look at those people, I'm like, yeah, well, I'd share that. And that's just me being vulnerable to allow others and give them space. And that's the thing I think you're talking about too, is when we're open and we talk about our struggles, because nobody's perfect, we all struggle. And at some point in our lives, we all like deal with traumatic life events. But it's that generational thing of our parents' generation being like, don't air your dirty laundry.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that expression in my house so many times.
But do you know what that really is? It's that saying, suppress your trauma, suppress everything, keep it down, keep it quiet, don't talk about it. If we don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. But what I tell everybody is like, you know, like time heals all wounds. No, it doesn't. Time does not heal wounds.
Right.
That doesn't heal anything. It just suppresses it.
Yeah.
All that energy still lives there and it's eventually going to come to surface. Mm-hmm. What you're doing is you're hoping you just don't remember it anymore. But that energy from that traumatic life experience, whether somebody dumped you or they hurt you in a really bad way, to just sit there and go, I'll just give it some time. Time heals all wounds. It does not. That energy is still living in your body and it's going to get you to trigger in so many other ways. Mm-hmm. And usually it's with alcohol. It's usually with drugs. It's usually a spiral downward. So let me ask you this too, is that you did struggle with alcoholism. And what do you think led you down that path?
So I was not an alcoholic. I did not have a problem with alcohol. So I thought when I first ended up in therapy that I wasn't expecting. I was a party girl. Mm-hmm. And the definition there was really blurry for me. You know, like being a party girl, being the life of the party is looked at as a positive thing. Right. And the belle of the ball, if you will, or, you know, when you can go downtown in whatever city you're in and the bartenders know you and your drink slides across the counter, you know, before you even order it, or you don't have to wait in line to get in because the bouncers all know you. It gives you this false sense of just awesomeness, you know, and so that became my identity. I became that person that was cool in those circles for a hot second. And so I didn't identify as having a problem with alcohol. I ended up sort of imploding my life in 2009, and I thought it was depression. So I ended up getting into this outpatient treatment. I'll tell you all the things that happened if you want to hear them that led up to that. But when I ended up in this outpatient treatment, I finally checked myself in because I became suicidal, and I just wanted the pain to stop. And I couldn't put a finger on why it was there to begin with. I mean, why me, right? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Why am I so self-destructive? I can't stop. And I was hurting myself with food and with alcohol and with attention seeking from guys, call it sex and love addiction, and any substance that I felt like using, and I couldn't stop. When I checked myself into that treatment program, well, first of all, you can pick on me because I think it's hysterical. The first thing the woman gives me after the first session was this list of feelings, like 100 feelings on a piece of paper. How embarrassing is that, to be 28 years old? And she's like, I don't think you know how to identify with your feelings. And I was like, F feelings. Like, why would I need that? I just do life, man. I don't need feelings. And so that was interesting. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I'm really missing out on some aspect here that I should get in touch with. But then they made me not drink for the 30 days of the program. And I started sort of mocking them. Like, I don't have a problem with alcohol. People that are alcoholics are the guys that live under the bridge and they drink out of the paper bags, the homeless dudes. And to me, someone who didn't drink was that personification of the awkward person in the corner at a party who didn't know how to socialize and had no fun. And that was someone that I would go pressure to drink because I'm like, you can't just not drink. You're weird, right? And I never wanted to be that person. And I didn't identify as the only person that I knew that would be an alcoholic or someone who'd go to AA. It would be like the greasy cigarette smoking, old crusty dudes like in those, basements of churches and stuff. And so I said, well, I don't have a problem with alcohol. That's not going to be, she said, okay, great. Then this won't be hard for you. And totally cornered me. And I was like, well, shit, now I have to do this not drinking thing. So I attempted to not drink. And here's the long answer to how I figured out that I actually had a problem with alcohol. I attempted to not drink. And then I was like, I'll just go to the bars and meet my people and have fun and be around I'm giving air quotes if you're listening to this instead of saying my friends, air quotes, because they're obviously not, I'll just hang with them and I won't drink. I'll drink seltzer or something and just have a good time. And so then I would show up at the bar and realize that was just not a possibility because the drink would come sliding across the bar at me and everybody knew my name and it would be way too weird for me not to drink. So very quickly that was proven wrong, that I couldn't actually do that internally or externally. And I also, it turned out I couldn't end up like flirting with people in that bar environment if I wasn't drinking. And I realized pretty quickly that was a trigger for me, that I was socializing so that I could feel good about myself. It wasn't about getting to know other people or connecting with them to care about them. It was about how they could validate me, Ugh, I hate the feeling of even saying that out loud now because it was such a shallow existence, It was like using everyone around me just to feed me. Like I was just some sort of, I don't know, yeah. And then what would happen is that I would go home and I would like lock myself into my room so that I wouldn't go to the bar and drink. I wouldn't go out and seek validation elsewhere. And this, by the way, was after I had lost my husband. I left him and think of going for someone else. And then it ended up that I lost my job and I lost my car and my family sided with my husband because he's a good human being and they have good taste. And I lost my dog. Like it was straight up country song. Like I lost everything. And this was from a friend's couch that I was sleeping on. So I would go home and I would lock myself in my room. And then I ended up going down into the kitchen and finding solace through extra food. So I would have bowl after bowl after bowl of cereal or ice cream on cereal. And I would binge like 15, 20,000 calories in a sitting. And sometimes it would end up, coming up again and sometimes it wouldn't. And just either way, the sickness was so strong in me and so pervasive, from any angle. I didn't even know where it was coming from. So alcohol is for sure in there. It wasn't my first addiction. It's not the hardest one to kick. Honestly, I think food addiction is the hardest thing of all of them. But alcohol was the lubricant to allow me to go out and act in other ways that were self-sabotaging and also that I could act in ways that I felt like were going to help me, but ended up really hurting me.
So you went to treatment?
I went to a 30-day outpatient, which was like
So
a half
IOP.
day.
So it's kind of like IOP,
Yeah.
right?
So it was like 8 to noon,
Yeah,
and you
it's
show
IOP.
up, and each day IOP.
Yeah. So I work with people. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
intensive outpatient. So I work with a lot of groups that do IOP. So, and they have IOP and PHP, different levels of treatment when people, I always say it's just really meeting people where they're at. Not everyone wants to check in and go to residential treatment, nor can they if they've got a job, so you try to meet people where they're at so they can still get help and get them through the door. So IOP is a great way to do that. But here's what I wonder, though. At what point, because I always say, too, and I'm a true believer of this, is like unhealed trauma, unhealed issues like that are the reasons why people numb and why they use that to cope. So you're using food to cope. You're using booze to cope. You're using all these other things to cope and cover up something that is triggering you because it's unhealed. And so where did you begin the healing process, and where did things, because obviously you don't drink, right? Or do you
Correct.
drink today?
No,
okay.
I do not. No.
Okay, you don't. And so when did you really begin that healing process, and what did that healing process really start to look like?
Yeah. So it actually was that IOP program that was really the gateway to my healing, because I wouldn't have gotten into it if I thought that it was about alcohol or drugs, right? Because I did not identify as a person with a problem with alcohol. Every single person around me drank like I did. Even my parents' friends, They might not have done the blackout and the excessiveness, but they always were drinking when they were together and socializing. So what was cool about that is that I was willing to go into that place for depression, which is a more socially acceptable thing in the circles that I come from, right, than necessarily alcoholism. From there, that showed me that because I couldn't do life without the numbing and the coping mechanisms, of those substances and behaviors, I actually had a problem with them. And so in that time, I went, well, shit, I was not expecting that I was going to be this bad at life. And obviously, everything that I thought I knew how to be, how to think, how to live is not working. I was 28 years old. I had the nice car, the corner office, the things, that I thought I was on that track. And yet it all imploded. And so I looked at it sort of objectively at that moment. And I looked at it like I was a business person analyzing the results. And I said, Hannah, if you were the CEO of your own life right now, look at the results. And I fired myself as the CEO of my own life, because obviously the devastation was everywhere. And my results sucked. So I had to find a different CEO. And I checked myself into 3 12-step programs simultaneously, like any good addict, if you're going to do it, just go home, go hard or go home. Right. And in my normal extreme way, I just, all or nothing. And so it was 3 12-step programs. I was living on a friend's couch because I had been kicked out of my house by my amazing husband, who's still my husband, by the way, to this day. We broke up for 8 months while I was getting clean and sober. And he kept eyes on me from afar and checked in. And then eventually, when I was a healthy enough person, we came back together and reframed our relationship completely from scratch. And we've been together for 19 years now.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that insane?
It's awesome. I think what's really great about that, though, and sharing that, is I think that it does give a lot of people hope. Because, listen, untreated trauma leads to destructive behavior, and that destructive behavior will eventually end relationships. It just does. And your husband had every right to want to leave you and not be with somebody who is sick in their disease and self-destructive. He deserves a good life too. And I know that the whole marriage thing through sickness and this health are better. No, F that. I'm sorry. If somebody's destroying their life, they don't deserve to destroy yours as well. And so your family was right by not siding with you and just going, no, you need to look at yourself.
Yeah.
And what they were doing, it's tough love. Mm-hmm. And I always tell parents, it's the same thing. The hardest bond to break through to is the parent and child, because parents' natural instinct, animalistic instinct, is to, I'm going to do everything to save and protect my child at all costs. But sometimes what they're actually doing is sending their child to their grave faster by enabling them.
Right.
Instead, what your family did is says, oh, no. No, you are in the wrong. He's not,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But
But the cool thing about your story is And that I tell everybody that I work with in recovery or counsel in recovery, I tell them, they all want to make amends, right? When they first get sober, right? It's like, I want to go say I'm sorry to everybody and just da-da-da-da. I was like, no, okay. They've all heard that from you. Mm-hmm. That's
Many
the
times.
last thing they want to hear from you is, I'm sorry for what I did. No, they're done hearing I'm sorry from you. So what I tell them all is, no. You're not going to say anything, okay? You're not going to say anything. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to work on you. You're going to work on you becoming the best you can, okay? Because once you become the best you can, that's all your family ever wants anyway. They just want you to be the best you. And the moment you decide to commit to yourself and be the best version of you, guess what they all do? They all want to then be around you. And they'll all come back to you. Mm-hmm. And those relationships oftentimes will repair themselves. And I think your case is a perfect example of that. When you said he was watching you from afar, he was probably like, is she going to do this? Is she going to take care of herself? And is she doing this for her rather than just doing this for me to win me back?
Right.
And I think that's the big difference as to why you've been together for 19 years.
Absolutely. And it was really hard for him at the same time, to do that. And now he speaks to people who are loved ones of those who are suffering, which is amazing. I mean, that was one of our conditions of getting back together, actually. We were like, you know what? Higher power, thank you for bringing us back together. And as this is such a gift as a second chance, what we promise is that, number one, we're going to keep recovery first. Hannah's recovery has to be above everything else. Yeah. Otherwise, nothing else is going to last.
And that's not a selfish take either. I tell everybody that's not selfish when we tell people in recovery, the only person you need to be worried about yourself right now is you. And you are number one, and your sobriety is number one. Because without that, everything else destructs.
Right. Absolutely. And there's proof. Look back, I mean, obviously there's enough proof in our lives. It's really simple to see that. So he was really quick to be on board. Some of the things that he did super well at the beginning were he educated himself about the addictive illness, the disease of addiction, as quickly as he possibly could. He went to Barnes & Noble and he bought 5 or 6 books on addiction. And he devoured them. And I remember going over and watching him highlighting and taking notes. And it just got me so much, because one of the things that allowed him to do is see my nasty behavior, all of the horrible things that I did in my sickness, as the sickness acting out rather than me. And then in there somewhere was Hannah, who was being suffocated by what I call the parasite of addiction, right? Whose only goal is to survive, even if it has to kill its host. And when he started to look at it like that, then he had compassion for me in those behaviors, realizing that they aren't me. They weren't me. They were me being taken over by some force that was way greater than myself. And that's what allowed him to have the drastic levels of forgiveness that he's been able to use with me in all of these years. And from the very beginning, we had that sit down, not in my earliest recovery. I was doing 3 12-step programs intensely, like full-time job, whether I got rides to the meetings. I didn't have a car at that point. I didn't have a job. I would bum rides with other people in program. I would pull quarters out to take the bus. I would walk. I would do anything that I could to make 3 meetings a day, plus a call to a sponsor every single day, 7 days a week. And about 8 months later is when I finally started to come out of that spell, and the parasite was shrinking and Hannah was coming back alive. And that's when he saw it, and he said to me, and I'll never forget it, he goes, Hannah, you have finally become the person I always knew you could be, and you never allowed yourself to be. And from that moment on, we were able to become together from really different, really different perspective. One, with keeping recovery at the beginning as the number one for everything. Everything else comes after. And then 2 is that we would be willing to share our story whenever we were requested that it would help others. And it's hard. That's why I'm joking about the bat signal. I promised that, thankfully for my second chance, it's given me the opportunity to share with people the hope that yes, not every marriage is going to be repairable. I mean, I don't want to promise that either, because it's just not possible. Not everyone is like my husband. And he's built to forgive and to give second chances and to rebuild trust and to operate from that place of looking for the best in someone rather than the worst in them.
When did Miss American come around? When did this whole okay, because here's the thing. This is what kind of throws me a little bit about your story, is that you I will just say, just for me from like an outsider's perspective and judging beauty pageants, there's a level of perfectionism that goes on there. And I can only imagine what some of the conversations are like backstage with some of these girls, whether it's Miss America, Miss USA, Miss American, whatever, they're beauty pageants, right? And so, because there's a level of beauty and perfectionism involved with that. So tell me how perfectionism is something that sent you off the rails and was really one of your traumas, how perfectionism was that, but then you go and you run for Mrs. American and win Mrs. American. Square that one with me because I'm trying to understand that.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's interesting. So my tangled history with pageants began a long time prior to winning this national competition. It started when I was 16 and I entered on a dare because I was such an ugly duckling. You talk about trauma. I fought major challenges. Like I had acne, for example, so bad that I had to be on 3 rounds of Accutane. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
Have I heard of it? I had it at age 30 years old when I was the main anchor in CBS in Atlanta, Georgia, because I'd wake up and viewers would be like, "Did you bump your head?"
Oh, how fun.
And so I was on Accutane for 6 months. It changed thank God I did it. It was the best thing I ever did.
Right. But if you do that more than once, it can actually kill your liver and it shreds your insides. So they say don't do it more than once. To give you an idea of how bad my acne was, I had 3 rounds of it before it started to actually help clear me up. I had acne so bad on my shoulders and my back that I would have uncontrollable breakouts in high school. And people behind me in class would notice and pick on me, right? Of course, because of course they're going to pick on that girl.
Well, first off, that's trauma.
So yeah, that was traumatic.
That's trauma.
Okay.
I'm going to get you to understand. I'm going to get you to see that's trauma. Bullying is trauma.
Okay.
That's bullying. You know, that's bullying when other kids pick on you. I suffered childhood trauma just from me having a high-pitched voice when I was a kid. They called me girly voice and then mascara boy, which was the title of my book because it looked like I wore mascara and they would make fun of me. Makeup boy, mascara boy, all this, girly boy, all that stuff. That's all bullying. And as a matter of fact, we had a woman on the show recently, and she's now a doctor, but she lived under the 7th Street Bridge for like 7 years. And I asked her and I said, what was your traumatic life experience that drove you to become an alcoholic? You became homeless. You lived under the 7th Street Bridge here in Arizona for like 7 to 10 years. And she goes, Brandon, it's clear as day. I was at school. She was 5 years old. And a little boy comes up to her, calls her the N-word. She's a black woman, calls her the N-word and spits on her face. She's covered in spit. She goes to school leaders, principal, assistant principal, whoever it was, and said, so-and-so just called me the N-word and he spit all over my face. The teacher goes, get over it, and pushes the child away at 5.
Oh my goodness.
She goes, it was that moment that shamed me so bad that it was that moment. That's the trauma that led me down the dark path. Okay. So bullying is traumatic.
Yeah.
So you having body issues because of acne, especially as a teenager and growing up, teens are so brutal to each other. So, okay, that doesn't surprise me.
Well, I'm glad that you talk about trauma because being someone who comes from a place of not having a major trauma in my story, I haven't learned a lot about that, you know, and how much that maybe actually has deeply affected me.
Right.
I was also super, super skinny. And so I was this tall, lanky, I chopped all of my hair off. Actually, it was like your length because I was so tired of all these pretty girls in my high school looking all the same. I call them the Barbie girls. Yeah. And I couldn't stand them because I was nothing like them. And so I chopped my hair off in rage one day and it was a cheap haircut, like a really bad, super cheap haircut. And then I tried to dye it blonde and because I did it with, of course, the lemon juice and sitting outside and the sun in, totally.
Sun in. I have 2 older sisters. Yes.
Sun in. It turned bright orange. Yeah. And so it was a bad haircut with bright orange and really bad acne and skinny. And I was just so awkward and literally so ugly that I never had a boy ever look at me until I was, 18 years old. And it just, when I got a postcard in the mail. So picture that. I mean, really, and I have photos to show this. This is no joke. Like everybody who knew me back then will acknowledge this. I'm not, this is not hyperbole, like what I actually look like. And this postcard came in the mail to compete for Vermont Teen USA. And I was with my brother and my 2 girlfriends, because I only really had 2 friends, and then my parents, and everybody started laughing. My brother had a few friends over. Everybody started laughing, and they were like, oh, they must have sent that to the wrong house. You know, I mean, you grill each other. Like, my family were fun. We pick on each other for love. And so that's fine. But when it got to the point of you could never do that, something went off in me. And I was like, really? Nobody tells me what I can't do. Nobody tells me what I can't do. And I'm going to prove to you that I can. And that's just how I'm built. I'll stand up to a challenge like that. And so I enrolled myself as this total tomboy. I had never worn heels. I had never worn a skirt. And I was 16 years old and I showed up. And this is Vermont. So it was farm girls for the most part, right? And I still, that said, came in dead last. And instead of it shutting me down, though, it just fueled my fire that I was going to learn this craft, because I wasn't going to let them, be right. And I was going to show up and I was going to do this until I won. And not only until I won a state, but until I won a national title. And so the next year I went back. I was a little bit better. I came in first runner up. And then I went out to Arizona. And I started to show up at these pageants, and I would watch in my difference of how these girls looked and acted. And they seemed so regal and so classy. And they had all of this charm that I didn't have. I just was this real, just natural kid. And I didn't have this poise that these beauty queens had. And so I worked on perfecting. And every extra dollar that I had through college, I would put into hiring a vocal coach, who, by the way, told me that I should speak rather than sing. I'm that bad at singing. And so I didn't do that. And a walking coach. And, I had people help me and sponsor me, and I did it. And every time the judges would say, you aren't enough, I took it personally. And I was like, well, I'm going to show you, because I'm going to become enough. And so I would work and I would keep showing up and going back. And I'd lost for years, and I was horrible at it for years. And then I started to get a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. 2013, I finally had gone through this debacle. I had been sober now for 2 years. I had my first little daughter, and I was like, you know what? I really feel like I want to use this one thing that I've worked so hard at in my life. If I could ever be good at it and help people out by using the microphone that a crown and a sash really are, why don't I tell them my recovery story? That was when I really first started to let recovery publicly change my life and be a way that I could then heal people who came behind me and reach out that hand, because no one expected it from a quote unquote beauty queen. So I won Mrs. Vermont, and I took an ugly story in a beautiful gown to Mrs. America in 2013. And to everyone's great surprise, including mine, especially mine, I was top 15 at Mrs. America. And I was like, this is amazing. Done. I could hang up the high heels. I could go back to regular life, put away the gowns, just do my deal. A happy husband. I'm back with my family at this point in time. Like, we've all reunited. Like you said, I've done so much work. They just came back around me. I became a trustworthy person. My word meant something again. And I was just trying to live an authentic life for the first time ever. And that was a cool part of it, but I retired. So I thought, and then I don't know, about 2 years ago, well, 3 years ago now, how you get those just kind of taps on your heart sometimes about something that you don't want to do. You ever had that happen?
Yeah.
And I started to have these dreams about competing for Arizona, Mrs. Arizona American. And I was like, no. And I would wake up going, babe, I just had this nightmare. Like, I don't want to do that. That's part of my past. I loved it when I did it, but it was all about fulfilling me. It was that external validation, except for my last time when I went to Mrs. America. It was about giving through my recovery story. But all the rest of that time, it was about validation. And I was just like, I don't need that anymore. I have my family. I have this awesome real estate career. I'm loving life. You're building businesses. I'm building businesses. We have 3 kids now. Life is amazing. And for 2 years, I got this knock on my heart, and it kept coming to me. You need to compete. You need to compete. And finally I was like, okay, fine, God, I'll compete. And I showed up to Arizona and won the state title of American. And then I went on to the national competition where there were 49 other crazy women like me who wanted to serve their state. And they were a bad enough judge of character that they gave me the crown. They gave me the title. Yeah. So then I I ended up using that opportunity to teach what I've learned about vulnerability and about perfectionism.
So here's what I'm going to...
Ironically, like in this whole process.
Well,
That's what I can tell you.
I think the thing is that you ended up winning after you started to be real.
Yeah. So ironic, right? And that's the whole cool part about the story.
Yeah, is that's when you started to achieve success, whether it's a fucking crown or not.
Yes.
I don't give a shit if it's a crown or anything like that.
Right.
The life lesson is really good things start to come to you when you start being real. Like I look at my life and, you know, I've won 5 Emmy Awards and 4 of those Emmys came in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
After I came clean about who I was in my story.
Isn't that so amazing?
So I won 4 of those. And before leading up to that, and you know what also too though, be quite honest with you, is when I didn't care anymore. Because I was in news, now retired, but I was in news for 22 years. And I would say for about 20 of those years, I would do things and like want to do stories and want to do things with the hope of winning an Emmy Award. So my intent was never about the story. Right. It was about the perception of me having Emmys. Okay. So, and guess what? I'd get nominated. I was nominated for like 14 or 15 times and I never won one. And I was so disappointed because I put more value in the trophy than I did actually about just being me and my authentic self and being me on the air. And then when I didn't care anymore, I started winning all the Emmy Awards. I didn't even go to the awards.
Isn't that
I didn't
awesome?
even show up to get it.
Yes.
So I was just like, okay, they won and they brought it to work.
That's wild.
You know, and I will say this too, is that for those first 20 years, and you know, I tell my former co-anchor, Yetta Gibson, all the time, I said, I finally became the best version of myself as a news anchor when I was my authentic self on the air, not a projected image of what I thought a news anchor should be. And
absolutely.
And of course, the double-edged sword with that was that I retired. Well, I don't know if it's double-edged sword. I retired at the top of my game. I retired doing the best job I've ever done in news. And that's when I walked away from it. Because I lost the passion for it. But I think the similarities is that the moment we become and we start acting our authentic self, and that's really a moment where we no longer have shame about something, when we just own who we are, is actually the moment that people are gravitating toward you. And that's like the real crazy thing about it, is that people become a projected image of themselves trying to win the attention of others. But really, you win the admiration of others when you just live and become your true authentic self without the worrying, are these people going to like me?
Right.
And it's like the moment you don't care anymore is the moment everything starts happening that you've always ever wanted. And I don't know. I just think that had you won that crown early on in life, it wouldn't have been for good, you know? Yeah. But I think as soon as you had a platform and a message for good is when that platform was given to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I see so many parallels in that story. It was when I got to the place of not needing it anymore.
Right.
Like, I don't need it for me. It's sparkly. It's beautiful. It's not for me. It's for being able to use this as a platform to share a story that might help other people. Because I never had an example ever of anybody who lived a sober life. Why would I ever want to live a sober life? I never saw an example of one. So now, because of this silly crown and the silly sash, you know, it doesn't mean anything on its own, but the value to it is the impact that I can make, because it's like a door opener. And it's not about me at all. And I truly, truly entered this system this time knowing that from my core. Yeah, I get professional hair and makeup and, you know, it was fun to dress up. But man, the amount of money that I've spent doing this pageant system and competing for a couple of years, and the opportunity cost of me not working in my profession has cost us not only tens, but hundreds of thousands of dollars in the last couple of years. I'm looking at that now that I've retired and I crowned my successor, and Went on to Mrs. World. I was top 6 at Mrs. World, which was crazy cool for a girl like me, a little old girl from Vermont who is really open about my struggles with alcoholism and addiction and that I'm a person in long-term recovery. Who would have ever thought that I could, quote unquote, achieve something like that, right? But because it's not about me, I could walk out and just share who I really am and be like me or lump me, it doesn't matter. I was called to be here.
Right.
You know, I'm just showing up. I see the bat signal and I show up. And if that looks like doing a podcast, if it looks like going to talk to recovery groups, if it looks like leading the rally for recovery in Rhode Island that I did a few years ago and talked to 20,000 people, it was an amazing opportunity to do that. But that's not what it's about anymore. You know, for me, the greatest gratification comes when I get a message from someone who was there years ago and writes me and was like, hey, Hannah, I saw you, you know, this was when I was Mrs. Vermont. I saw you as at the Rally for Recovery speaking about being a person in long-term recovery. It inspired me so much to see someone sharing their story publicly in a position like you have, that I've started to go around my local area and share my story of recovery publicly as well. And I've gathered a tribe of people who are going around and doing the same thing. She goes, the impact that I'm making in my community blows my mind. There's nothing more meaningful to me. Like, that is why I went through all of the struggles that I have in my life, is so that I can share with someone else hope that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, you know? And
I love that.
That's what it's all about.
But that is what it's all about. And I think that's like actually a perfect closing message, because, you know, I tell people all the time, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
But guess what? Healed people heal people. And so we all have a choice to no longer be victims of our trauma. We get to choose to heal from it. And when we do heal from it, we have the chance to go help other people through their trauma by just showing them there is a way. You know, there is a way out of that. And I think it's important.
Yeah.
Well, I hope one thing we discovered today is that, yes, some of those things that did happen to you were traumatic. And you probably didn't tell people because you were probably like, no, that's not traumatic. You minimize it. I think that...
Oh, absolutely.
I think that you've done a really good job at just minimizing it, rather than just being like, no, I was bullied as a kid. And yes, that is traumatic. And yes, that sent me sideways. And that drove me to perfectionism. That drove me to want to be perfect. It drove me to want to go do those things, you know? And that should be just enough, you know? Because you know what, Hannah? There's going to be other people out there. And I think this is really why it's important for you. Because there are going to be people out there who are going to sit there and go, no, I had a perfect childhood. And your story, I won't be able to cut through to them. And I'm going to tell you why. Because they're going to look at my trauma and they're going to compare, and they're going to be like, well, mine wasn't as bad as Brandon, so I didn't have trauma.
Uh-huh.
But I think why yours is so important in order for you to really share those things is because there's a swath of people out there who were bullied, not just bullied, but bullied. And maybe they had a mom who said a few sideways things to them that as a child it has stuck with them. Okay? Your story is going to be able to help them identify and going, well, wait a second. Maybe that was the reason that's led me down this path. And let me address it, you know, so that they can heal too.
Yeah.
So
it's awesome.
No more Hannah saying that I didn't have any trauma growing up as a child.
Okay.
As
I'm
a
learning
child.
something today.
You know,
I'm learning something today.
No more of that. No more of that, because it really is. It's really detrimental, especially when it happens in early childhood years of development and brain development. Those things really impact the brain.
Right. And things that I've learned in recovery too are that it's not always just about what happens to us, but it's our own interpretation of what happens to us, right? Yeah. Sometimes it's very obvious trauma. And for other people, they could have had the same exact upbringing as I did and come out perfectly fine. Not internalize those little things that mom would say that would cut me down, or the comparisons that I would make to dad's friends' kids, right? It was my own already alcoholic predisposition in my brain, addictive and compulsive way of viewing the world that interpreted that into, you're not enough. You're not enough. You're not enough. You're not enough. And that, I think, is probably my own personal trauma, is the internalization of life around me. That was a pretty normal, I mean, it's a lot of it's normal stuff for a teenager, but I internalized that as I'm not enough.
You know, there's been a lot of articles recently. There's not really a debate. A couple guys wrote an op-ed. I think one was in the New York Times that sent the whole recovery world kind of spiraling mind because he said addiction is not a disease. And I'm a believer that, yeah, it is a genetic disease. I just truly believe that. Okay, so I'm not going to push back against that. But I do not believe everybody who has the genetic disposition to become an addict becomes an addict. It is a traumatic life experience. It is trauma that basically unleashes, it triggers that to go into effect. So yeah, it could be a disease. It is a disease, but not everybody who has the genetic makeup will become an alcoholic. It is a traumatic life event that triggers it.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. I mean, those statistics out there can, and as with any statistics, right, we can debate them on both sides. My experience is absolutely it's a disease, but before it becomes a substance-oriented disease, it is a mental disease, right? And we see that by the behavioral addictions around us. As proof of what you're saying, you know, you look at the porn addiction, the sex addiction, the digital addiction, the food addiction, the debting addiction, the spending addiction, the shopping addiction.
It's
what did I miss?
Coping to make somebody feel comfortable at that moment.
Right.
Shopping.
But
people
if you're
don't
not
look at that as a big thing because everybody goes to the
Right.
mall and everybody shops.
Right. But that is as pervasively destructive in someone's life as the alcohol and drugs.
1,000%
And that's
it is.
my story to show like the food addiction took me out, you know, because it created the shame and the self-loathing that then perpetuates the problem.
Tie, ready? That coping
you know?
skill, that tie goes back to little skinny Hannah not fitting in with all the other girls. It's body dysmorphia, right? It's not accepting accepting the beauty of our bodies. It's interesting to hear where you say that, you know, you were made fun of or you felt insecure and then seeing where those coping mechanisms took you.
Yeah. And you look back at the family too. Like, how does a family celebrate? And I look back at every single celebration and every single morning and not morning,
Was
like
it food?
Wake up. It was like, if you're sad, food.
See?
If you're excited,
There you go.
Food. Celebrate. Food is love, is
comfort.
how I was brought.
Love and comfort.
Right? Love and comfort.
So when you felt not loved or not comfort, what did you go to? Food to make you feel those ways.
Absolutely. But for people to minimize that and say it's not an addiction.
No, it is addiction.
It's
and it's
crazy powerful.
It is extremely detrimental. And that is why the other thing too is that addiction is not just drugs and alcohol.
Right.
It is not.
Yes. Thank you for saying that.
Food addiction. It's not gambling. It's trauma. It is unhealed trauma within our bodies that we have to process. And until we go back and reprocess that trauma and heal from it, from whenever that trauma happened, we will continue to be triggered and we will continue to cope with things that are detrimental to our well-being.
Yes.
Period.
Perfectly summarized. You know, I like to describe addiction sometimes as a not fully blown up balloon, right? And when you squeeze it on one side, you know how it kind of bubbles out in between your fingers, and then you try to push that bubble down and it bubbles out somewhere else, and then it bubbles.
It's a great analogy.
Like, you can't keep the bubbles in until you heal the source. And it has to be an identity shift, a complete identity change. Because, you know, in the recovery process for any of this stuff, I can't just, with food, for example, you can't just be abstinent with food like you can with alcohol or with drugs, right? It's around you all the time.
Same with sex.
Same as sex. You have to eat. These are like basic, you know, human needs, the sex thing too. And so when I change my identity around it, it's not that I can't eat that or that's not part of my diet, or I'm going to weigh and I'm going to measure. And granted, everybody has their own way to get to mental health around it.
And there's a spectrum.
I'm not judging. And there's a
spectrum.
But for me, that is just more limitation, and it's more boundaries that I'm likely to rebel, because that's what I do. But when I redefine myself through inner deep work at my core, as I'm a person who chooses to support myself and my beautiful body to be its healthiest by choosing food that supports and sustains me, to give the biggest and best version of me that I can to my world, I'm more likely to choose something healthy than I am to choose junk food, right?
Correct.
It's just identity. When you change your core identity, like, I'm someone that wants to show up and connect with you from the deepest parts of our soul possible, even if I only know you for 5 minutes.
Right.
I have zero interest in small talk in my life. Zero interest. I only want to talk to people and with people where it's meaningful and I can learn something about you and I can find a golden nugget in you that I can nourish and nurture and show you, because that's what fires me up. I can't do that if I'm under the influence.
Yeah.
So I choose not to drink, because then I'm missing out on my favorite parts of life,
right,
which are connecting deeply with another human.
Well, we're going to end this podcast right now. But I'm going to drop a bomb, because it goes on this, and then everybody's going to be like, what did he just say? Because just as you said, you know, like, you don't just stop having sex, even though if you're a sex addict, right? You got to heal the trauma as to why you're using sex as to make yourself feel good and as a coping mechanism. Same thing with food. You can't go through life without eating it, right? So you have to just learn to heal from the trauma, and you won't won't abuse food and as a way to cope and heal. And I will tell this, and I believe that addiction is on a spectrum. Not everybody has the same, just like autism is. There's a spectrum. Addiction, mental health, there's a spectrum to everything. And I'm going to say this, that I truly believe that just because you abused alcohol, if you go back and you really do sincerely heal from the trauma, EMDR, shamanism, do real inner child work and heal from those traumatic memories, there are some people who can drink again and they won't abuse alcohol in the same way. Because I used to grow up in the first umpteen years of AA, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yes.
5 meetings a week for 12 years, okay? I know every platitude. And I know that there's a saying, once an addict, always an addict, and I do not believe that.
I can't wait till the next episode when we can unpack that.
And people are going to be like, what? That's so anti-AA. I don't care.
Right. It's so controversial.
It is. It's so controversial in the recovery world in some aspects, but I don't believe that. I used to be very, very black and white when I was in AA, like all the time in AA. And I was just like hardcore. I was black and white. I was like, no, once an addict, always an addict, da, da, da. But through lived experience and through doing deep-seated trauma work, and understanding my own journey and speaking to shamans and other trauma therapists, many of them are on the same wavelength that I am. If you heal from your trauma, you will not cope in the same way that you used to. So we'll save that for next episode.
I can't wait.
All right. Because that's what we do. Poked a little bear.
We could go on for another hour and talk about this.
We absolutely could. But it's the same reason why I'm in favor of... Yeah. Well, I'm in favor of some people going to ketamine clinics. I'm absolutely in favor of science advancing and that using microdosing with LSD to help people deal with PTSD. And I'm also in favor of microdosing shrooms to help people with trauma, depression, anxiety. Hell yeah, I'm in favor of it. And I don't care if I get a backlash of people in recovery for it. Is that there's not one way to get sober. And this is what I told my home group in AA is going, get off your high horse sometimes. AA is not the only way to get sober. And you need to learn and accept that as well. That's true. There's many paths to do it. There's many paths to do it. And just because one way works for one people doesn't mean that that's the only way to go forward. And at the same time, just to play a little devil's advocate on you, because I love you and I respect you. And my brain, if I'm someone who doesn't want to not have to drink, right? That was convoluted. But if I would like to be able to drink, I'm going to say to you that I will be that teeny tiny micro percentage that can go out and drink again, even if I'm also realistically 1 out of 10 people are genetically predisposed that if you give us 1 drink of alcohol, we're going to turn alcoholic, meaning we're not going to have an off switch. Right. We're going to drink to excess or drink to blackout or wake up tomorrow and need to drink more and whatever. 1 out of 10 of us is genetically that's just what's going to happen. And fully accept that. And here's where we toggle, right? Is that if people in AA are of that makeup, right? Which I know I know myself. It scares me to death because I have the same types of spiritual leaders from all different walks and different paths and these really enlightened, amazing people who've also told me, Hannah, you're way more than just an alcoholic. You're limiting yourself with that identity. Now you've moved past that, right? Does that mean that I can drink again? I don't know, but I sure as shoot know that I'm not willing to blow up my whole life. And that's totally fine, to Hannah, find out. But you have to understand. And so that's the scary part of it too. But it doesn't have to be. At what risk? But you're able to make that choice. But you're able to make that choice. What I don't want is somebody saying you're making that choice and what's best for you is to then essentially shame or shun those who go a different path. Right. Well, and in my groups, we welcome people who come back, who go out and test the waters and come back with open arms and with love and with acceptance. But I wonder how many of those people have actually healed from their trauma rather than just getting a lot of time under their belt. Because just a quantity of time under your belt in recovery does not equal healing from trauma. Oh, absolutely. Okay. No, you have to do the deep work. No, you have to do the deep work. Meetings are just meetings are a very small sliver of the pie. And there's some people who it's their totality of their pie, but they've never healed from their trauma. So when we say recovery, I think we do need to talk about the definition of recovery. What is recovery? Because recovery does not look like somebody who's just strung 35 years of continuous recovery together. Right. That's not my definition of recovery. No, it's not a time frame, and it's not the number of meetings that you go to every week. No, because I always ask those people, I'm like, have you cheated on your wife? You have 35 years. Have you cheated? How many times have you been married in those 35 years? Right. How you show up for your kids? Right. Do you show up to do those things? That's recovery to me. How are you? And there's not a totality of time that creates that. It's the healing of the trauma. Right. that's how I base recovery. It's also why I don't count time. It's why I don't celebrate birthdays. It's why I don't collect chips. I just don't believe in the time as a model of recovery. I just don't.
No, I agree with that.
I get the other side of it. They're like, yeah, but it shows somebody that you can achieve long-term sobriety and recovery. I'm like, okay, I'll give you that. Okay. But like, I'm more, Chris, like, hey, what's your name? And my second question is going to be, how's your life?
Right.
Not how much time you have.
Right. It's the quality. It's the
just
quality over quantity, not to be so
person.
niche, like, cliche.
For sure.
The quality of
sure.
the change in who you are as a
Yes.
core. And there's something in your DNA that has shifted. Like
Totally.
people who know me today are not, like, if you knew me in high school and in college, you literally wouldn't recognize me as a human today.
Yeah.
You literally wouldn't.
Yeah,
I'm a
sure.
completely different person. And when I try to describe to people, and I'm sure it's the same way with you, like, oh yeah, I used to do this, and I was a party girl, and I would climb out into the ocean on the rocks in Rocky Point, and I would wander away, and I was absolutely without control. And people don't believe that about me. And it's a complete change in who we are.
All right, so we got to end the podcast because now my computer's it's still recording.
That's
but they're
how long
just
we
like
can
that's
talk.
how long we've been talking.
We're, like,
My
shut down your
screensaver after
system.
like an hour
awesome.
has like turned on. So anyway, I just want to thank you for coming on, having a great open dialogue discussion. Thank you for sharing your journey. Thank you for being so open and vulnerable to our viewers, because I know a lot of people out there can identify with it. I think it's really I think a lot of people will identify with that, because I think a lot of people will always say, I didn't suffer a lot as a kid, but why did this happen? And I think you're really going to help those people break through.
Cool.
So thank you for joining us on this episode of Escaping Rock Bottom. We'll see you back here for the next episode.